Nice to meet everybody. It's a real privilege to come to an organisation who's embarking on a similar journey into what Mersey Care have been on. I know both Aaron and David, and I really feel comfortable in saying the organisation is in good hands and actually a leadership that really wants to make a difference for its staff, and that's a really powerful place for an organisation to be. So for us, for about 3 years ago, I read a book. It's nothing shocking in that. I read a book and it just happened to be called Just Culture. And I remember having a conversation with my executive team about this book. And I said to my chief exec, Joe, I said, I'm going to go and find this guy called Sydney. And my chief exec said, he's Australian. I said, he's not actually Australian. He's Dutch. And he said, Amanda, you're sounding like a bit of a stalker now. So anyway, Sydney's quite delighted when I literally say I did hunt him down to find the real Sydney Decker. And we had a conversation. And that's really where our journey began a number of years ago. What I thought I would do is I'd start off the session today just to talk a little bit about what Just Culture is, because I appreciate some people in the audience might have never heard of it or might not know what it is. Is there anyone in the room in that way? So some people haven't heard of it at all, just checking. And then I'll go on to a little bit about our journey and our experience and really share our story. So before I do, I'd like you to do a bit of a strange thing. Could I ask everybody to stand, please? And close your eyes. And I just want you, when you're closing your eyes, I'm not going to ask you to say a prayer or anything like that. I just want you to close your eyes and have a moment of reflection and just think to yourself, in your working life, in your working day, do you ever make mistakes? If you have never, ever made a mistake at work, please sit down. Okay, open your eyes. So we're in good company now. We are all human. We know we're fallible. And we know that we're all capable of making a mistake. Does that make us a bad person? No. So please sit down and let me tell you our story. To begin with then, if I'm just focusing on what a just culture is, what a just culture is kind of saying is that nobody's account is true or false. Nobody's account is right or wrong, but it's about encouraging it to understand from both sides of the coin. When you have quite a retribution focus, and in HR we tend to do this, and I certainly believe I've done this in my career, we tend to focus on when there's an error or an untoward incident in the workplace. We look at which rule was broken. Who did it? Which person did it? And how bad was the breach? And often it's the only time you get the policy out of how you operate clinically. So you get the policy out and go, what did they do wrong? Yeah. What rule did they break? And sometimes what people will do is say, actually, that rule they broke isn't in there, so we need to rewrite the policy again. So next time someone breaks the rules, it is in there. And then we start often getting into the consequences of what punishment you should get. That then becomes a person-centred approach, which focuses on people as being the problem. Find out who did something wrong. We'll write more rules. We tell everybody to try harder. Let's get rid of those awful bad apples. Do we need an investigation? Maybe we need a hearing. And so on and so forth. And often and sometimes that can lead to sanction or no sanction. But there's a person behind that. And you heard David speak about that before. But what about learning? What about the team? What about review? What about the humility of being a human being in work who's coming to do the job to be the best that they can be? What about being forgiven? What about compassion? Do we think about these things all the time? Think about the language that sometimes we all get into when we're speaking about colleagues. We're not thinking about restoration. Often we're thinking about pointing the finger and about blaming, and that damages our trust. Restoration, which we use often in a clinical setting, a lot in clinical settings, but we don't often use it with our staff. How do we restore your confidence in us as an employer? How do we rebuild a relationship when damage might have been done between two parties or teams or line manager and manager? Who is hurt? What are their needs? And what is the obligation to meet those needs? We used to get told by our staff when there was an incident in work, the suits would come. Yeah? You get surrounded and all the suits would come. And that put fear into people. All of a sudden, all these senior clinicians and clinical people or management would swamp the environment in which the incident took place. But where were they before? Were they there? Were they accessible? Were they visible? Even in near misses, even in a near miss situation, or at worse, when an incident has occurred, and some of them can be really quite harmful, are we looking to who else can be hurt? Are we looking wider? Because sometimes it's not one individual, it's colleagues who've observed something that's taken place, who've observed how that individual has been treated as a member of staff. And whose obligation is it to support them? And what I want us to focus on is something that we call forward-looking accountability and not hindsight bias. And hindsight bias is, well, Amanda did this and Amanda shouldn't have done that. And if I was in Amanda's shoes, I would have done it like the policy says. Yeah? Not forward-looking accountability is what can we do to support Amanda? What's going on in Amanda's life? You know? What's happening for her to help her focus and be accountable for the actions that she takes in work. And if you look at the two focuses of retribution versus accountability, you know, if you look at it in a really quite crude sense of, you know, retributive is you pay or you'll settle accounts. So something's happened, you've done something wrong, so settle your bill. And that may be through a warning, sanction, suspension. Who is responsible? And what we do as a healthcare provider, we meet that hurt. We ignore the fact that the individual, the clinician, the member of staff who might have made a mistake, yeah, we ignore the fact that they're hurting too. Do you think they go home and celebrate the fact that they've made a mistake? No, they're hurting, and often we apply more hurt. And the opposite for that is let's meet hurt with healing. How can we support that member to recover, to gain their confidence, to feel accountable, to have the skills that they have to do the job? We're not devoid from accountability. We're not saying nobody's responsible, but there's wider responsibility than one individual. And the goals of restoration are really quite simple. Let's help heal each other. Let's help coming to work be a nice occasion. What we want to do for patients and our service users, let's do the same for each other. And sometimes we forget that we're human too. But the other big bit for me is often when people don't feel they can raise a concern or say, I don't like it here, or this has happened, what we're missing on is the opportunity to learn. And if we miss the opportunity to learn, we miss the opportunity to prevent other incidents occurring and actually potentially affecting each of you and also the patients that you care for. And very simply, a just culture is a safety culture. It allows you to tell your boss bad news without fear of what that bad news is going to be. And sometimes when you're a boss and people tell you bad news, it's not the greatest place to be. You don't always want to hear it, particularly at certain times when things are going on, maybe when the CQC here and someone says, oh, Amanda, we've just found this, or this has happened, or that's missing. It's very easy to be quite retributive in our focus, but it's about actually building people's confidence to make it right. And I believe if we do more of that, we're in a better place. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Mersey. Okay, so we've got 8,000 staff there or thereabouts now, over 80 geographical sites, which is quite a challenge for us. Our turnover is just over 360 million. We've got 790 beds, so a fair number of beds, but over 97% of our patient contacts are in the community. We also provide one of the 3 high secure hospitals in the UK. We've had 3 successive CQC ratings of good. I think we've kind of been assessed more than anyone I know, only because we've taken over a number of organisations. When I first joined Mersey, we had 3,500 staff. and we now have got 8,000 staff within the last 3 years. So we've grown very significantly. And we've also just recently acquired, as part of that growth, the former Liverpool Community Health Organisation that was subject to a care cut review, like yourself. And that's brought a new set of unique challenges for us to replicate what we've done at former Mersey Care there. So for us, what a just culture was about focusing on what was responsible, not who was responsible. At a very, very simple level. We're not saying that it was excusable to have that, not, you know, you can do absolutely anything and no one will do anything to you. Obviously, if there was willful neglect or somebody deliberately set out to do something, that's a whole different ballgame. And I don't think anybody would dispute that somebody should be held accountable for that. But ultimately, what we believed was to create the best safety culture. Staff need to feel safe themselves, to create that psychological safe space for you to explore your competence, your skills, your attitude, your behaviours, and have that comfort with your colleagues, with each other. So before 2016, I just wanted to give you the context of the challenges that we faced. We had something in Mersey Care called BHAGs. Does anyone know what they are? Big, hairy, audacious goals. It's a bit of an Americanism. And our challenge from our staff side colleagues, is there any staff side in the audience today? Few? Okay, our challenge was then was where was your big, hairy, audacious goal for your workforce? Yes, we had all the things, you know, we had a health and wellbeing plan, workforce plan, people plan, all the things that you would expect, but what is the big goal for our workforce? We also looked at our staff survey results, some very similar things to what David said before. And we also looked at the volume of disciplinary investigations. And what we found was over 50% of the investigations that we embarked on actually ended up in no case to answer. But there's a person behind that. There's people behind that. There's teams about that. They also had lengthy suspensions. I think we were far too quick to suspend. You know, something happened, oh, let's suspend the individual. And we were very rule-based, policy, process, investigation. We asked our staff a different question. We didn't ask our staff about staff experience. We just asked them a very simple question through mega conversations and said, what was your biggest barrier, or what is your biggest barrier to the delivery of the best care that you can give? And overwhelmingly, it was quite shocking, the feedback they told us. It was fear. They were scared, fear of getting something wrong, fear of being blamed, fear of causing harm to a patient or another member of staff, and fear of actually intervening to minimise risk. And, you know, you can imagine, we deal in my organisation with some of the most vulnerable people in society. And that requires intervention. Sometimes that requires hand-on intervention in a way that probably many of you won't have seen or be used to. And we've done so much positive practice in reducing restraint within our mental health settings. Yet, when it occurred or when something went wrong, we went into quite a punitive place with our staff. Staff advised us that actually the HR processes and the safety processes that we went to, we did a 72-hour review, you know, RCA processes. They felt they were very much focused on language like, sorry, David, like perpetrator, who's done something wrong, you know, what have you done? And staff really didn't like the language that we were using to explain the scenario, nor did they feel engaged in the process. And the assumption was that if you'd gone through a 72-hour review, that would lead to a disciplinary investigation automatically. Now, that was a false assumption, but nonetheless, that was staff's assumption. And when you look at the volume of disciplinary cases that we're having, it's no wonder that was staff's assumption. We had a high volume of ER investigations, lots of allegations, lots of disciplinary action, some of them resulting in tribunal. But the bit that we were missing is there was no learning. There was no preventional conversation because staff didn't feel safe in raising those issues or those concerns. So this is just a clip of a few articles that were in the press. We had strike action. We had lots of poor publicity and hostile relationships with our unions, if I can say it like that, because of the actions that we were taking as an organisation. And as a board, we were saying, we know staff are coming to hearings and investigations and lying to us. We know they're lying to us. Why are they lying to us? And we kind of missed the point. They were lying to us because they thought that was the only way they could, be free, be allowed to continue their careers. They didn't trust the system enough to tell the truth. And I think when you train in HR, and colleagues who are from that background will accept that when we go through our training, what they say to us, if somebody lies to you, the employer-employee relationship is broken and that trust is broken. Therefore, how can you continue that relationship? And we were kind of in that mode, that rule-based, dotting the I and crossing the T. And I think we weren't really reflecting to try and understand, really diagnose what the issue was. To say, well, rather than just write an action plan to try and fix things, what is the problem that we are trying to fix? And this incident over here, and I'll talk about one of the individuals involved in this later on, is we had 3 inpatient suicides in quite a short space of time on one unit, not the same ward, but one unit. And our reaction was to suspend all 3 staff. And that spiraled into so many things that now I'm ashamed to say we were involved in as an organisation. Absolutely ashamed that we hurt those individuals, their families, for a significant period of time. And they've shared and been part of our journey. So in 2016, we decided under radar to see if we could try a different approach. And the reason why we did it under radar, because I didn't want to kind of go out and say, oh yeah, HR director's read a book and, and we're going to do just culture now, because before we taught the language of Jim Collins, from good to great, and now it's going to be just culture and it become a bit of a thing. We wanted to test out some assumptions. So we worked with our staff side, we worked with our divisional management teams to say, what could we do? We looked at the evidence, and there's lots of academic authors on just culture, not just Professor Decker, but we really liked the language in Professor Decker's literature of restoration rather than some of the other academics that we looked at. Through that process, we really started to rebuild some of those relationships with our staff side colleagues and understand our data a lot more fully. We really modified our language and we looked at policies and procedures, and it's amazing the things that go out. I did something I didn't even know I did, so we work in a high secure setting, and if somebody takes or attempts to take a mobile phone through, and often that's because you forget. I've actually done it myself. You get a mobile, oh God, I forgot, and the system picks it up, but you then get a letter from me. I didn't even know I sent one. And you get a letter from me saying if you do it again, you're kind of on the naughty step, and then if you do it again, you go on the second higher naughty step. And it's things like that actually don't build relationships when the system is there to pick those things up anyway, so they never happen. You literally could not take that phone in, so it would get picked up regardless. But yet we put in procedures around sanctioning staff or criticising them as a consequence. So we really started to look at our language that we use, investigation, managing sickness absence rather than managing attendance. And when we introduced our recruitment system called Track, it said something like underneath, and if you are at risk and you don't look for jobs or something like that, you could face disciplinary action. So things that you don't even set out to be there exist in our systems and our paperwork now, that when you look back, you can really have a bit of a moment to giggle and reflect to say, how silly is that? And we did a bit of research, and we looked at all the policies and procedures often doctors have to read in their lifetime or know to actually fulfill their role. How many years do you think it would take the average doctor to read all what they should read to do their job? Any guesses?
3 years.
3 years? No, it's a lot more than 3. More than a lifetime, more than a few. It's probably around 2,000 years if you're to read everything. So when you think about the rules that we create, our policies and procedures, and actually, if we're really, really honest, you might have hundreds of policies, clinical policies. Do you look at them? Of course you don't look at them. So really, do we have policies to support practice, or do we have policies to punish? And that's something we've started to reflect on. And what we looked at really was moving from rules-based to safety-based, reintegrating practitioners, so helping them understand and learn from. And we stopped saying when something has gone wrong or when somebody's done something wrong or somebody's made a mistake, to it didn't go as expected or planned. And occasionally I do have a Freudian slip and someone will joyfully elbow me, and we do that as a bit of fun with colleagues, but it actually changing the language is really, really important in this space. So in 2017, we felt brave then because the evidence was starting to come in that this is having an impact. And we consulted our staff again. We asked them what they wanted our new approach to be for our BHAG for our staff. We didn't just want to give that word to them and say it's just culture. That was our aspiration. And we talked about it. And so we tagged on just in learning. Staff were very keen about keeping the just in because just is fair. So it's fair and a learning approach. So in 2017, we wanted to continue the success that we'd had, but we also wanted to encourage colleagues to learn and improve their safety. We established a committee. Obviously, we had staff side and Freedom to Speak Up Guardian on that. And we also had a number of Just and Learning ambassadors, and we recruited them to the fold. And a lot of those ambassadors had been through experiences, negative experiences within the organisation. So they were really bringing a credibility with them within the organisation, but also their personal experience and really bravely wanting to do something different and special so other people don't go through what they go through or had been through. And what that enabled us to do was start to gather momentum for the learning. So we established a microsite. We share good practice stories, good catches now. We share people's experiences. So if people have shared experiences when CQC have been in previously and maybe an area in one domain requires improvement and how that team felt. And we have a quality, we used to call it quality surveillance, but we've changed that language from feedback now. We have a quality review process, and it used to identify teams in trouble. Yeah, now it identifies teams that need support. So a real change in language, and just simple things like that have started to really have staff believe that we want to support them in those difficult times that they face. And, you know, looking at those clinical practices, the 72-hour reviews, and that was really important for staff because what they were saying to us is when an incident has happened at work and we have those 72-hour reviews, they're often not multidisciplinary, or they don't often have the whole team involved in that learning. And some of the language was used. So we had one member of staff that fed back to us that she was involved in an incident. 2 patients were attempting to get into a bit of a fight in one of our courtyards. She intervened and the patient pushed her out the way. She fell and she broke a leg. And in the 72-hour review, it said something like, member staff, physical injury only, no psychological harm. So that member of staff said to me, but Amanda, I had to use a commode. I couldn't go upstairs. I couldn't take my kids to school. I couldn't pick them up from school. Are you telling me that I didn't have any psychological harm? So we damage our staff sometimes about how we minimise the injury, whether they're physical, whether they're emotional. And particularly when they're emotional, we tend to minimise and think, oh, God, that's all that sloth stuff over there, isn't it? You know, it doesn't really mean a lot. But I know Chris will talk a lot about that later on. The impact of being nice versus not nice is absolutely fundamental. So this is our 2 of our clinical divisions. And to get some research behind what we did, so it wasn't just us saying it, Mersey marking their own homework, we got some research. We worked with Professor Sydney Decker and a company called Art at Work, and they came in, they interviewed our staff and reviewed our data. And what you can see is when you look at when we really started here in January 2016, you can start to see, can't you, the nosedive in ER activity to where we believe the restorative practice is actually embedded within the organisation. But here are the real numbers. So if you look back in 2014, in 1 year, we had 143 investigations. Our workforce was just under 4,000 then. To 2017, we had 58, and that's if we if we include our former Liverpool Community Health colleagues, when we had a workforce of 8,000. And again, it's reduced year on year. And that's quite profound. And if you look at the difference in terms of suspensions, in terms of where they were, if you suspend, 25 clinical staff, for example, that's probably going to cost you for 6 months around £300,000. The length of an investigation was taking our organisation, because there were so many of them, let's be frank, between 4 and 6 months, and we reckon that was about £2,500. So over here, this was costing our organisation circa 400k just to investigate and have a process. Just wasted money. But actually, it's not about the money, it's about the people. And there's not just one person behind that, there's often many people behind that. So what value have we created? We get asked this question all the time, and I do get asked a lot by accountants, so I'm not picking on you, Aaron, but I do get asked an awful lot by accountants, what's the economic viability of the work that you've done? And we can show that economic viability, and we reckon it's between 1 to 2% of the salary bill. That's what we reckon the cost and the impact of what we do. So it's profound. When we were a 260 million turnover trust, that was something between 1%, that was something between 1 million and 2.5 million pounds a year through having a different approach. And that's been verified now in the work that we've done with DECA. And we have got a research study that we can share which evidence that. So there's a lot of things that gets highlighted through the work that we've done. And we also have seen some of the changes in the staff survey, so staff feeling more able to speak out and more able to report unsafe clinical practices. Also, I think it's important to say, through the same period of time, we've seen more people raise concerns through the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, and that was really, really positive for us. If I use an example of former Liverpool Community Health, in the 8 years from 2010 to 2018, before we took over on contract, there wasn't any. There'd been a care cut review, yeah? There was no whistleblowing, and there was no freedom to speak up, yeah? In fact, I tell a fib, there was one, but that was through the prison office, the prisons, because they also provided care to the prisons. And yet now we're seeing people feel confident and able. The other thing that we've looked at is turnovers reducing, our incident reporting overall is reducing, and the harm that is hurting our staff. So one of the things we talk about, we've seen a 30% reduction on assaults from patients against staff through this period as well. So again, really supporting a risk-measured approach to how we restrain and support our staff to restore the relationships when times are difficult in some of our wards. The other thing we've looked at is local resolution for complaints, because often the only winner here is a solicitor. Apologies if there's any lawyers in the room. But, again, what we looked at, when staff have an injury at work, we often get into this years long of, they're saying this, we're saying that, they're saying this. And then we looked at the legal fees, and actually what the staff member got to what the solicitor got on both sides was sometimes 10 times more. So actually, would you not just be better saying and settling it earlier and reduce all that pain and that harm and that ping pong approach? And actually it builds that trust with that member of staff to say, I actually do want to come back into work. And we've also seen an improvement in our patient scores. In 2018, which is where we are now, obviously, we're doing very similar work in terms of what you're doing, actually. The big thing we're focusing on is psychological safety, supporting our leaders in this space. When your back's against the wall and you're stressed in your job and you've got lots of challenges, high performance metrics, things may not be where you want it to be. Do you then take that out on the team? Do you then take that on people around you? So what can we do to support the team dynamics and also assess managers on their leadership competency through their appraisal process? We've got more of a standardised approach to how we look at incidences, both clinical and non-clinical, and the support packages that go around our staff in that regard. And we're also now just quickly working on some guidance that we want to share because, and Roger will laugh at this, I've not been shy in coming forward at criticising or giving constructive feedback to NHSI about the rollout of their toolkit with Just Culture, because they've used an incident decision tree. And what does an incident decision tree ask? It says, who? So it's not focusing on a system process, it's focusing on an individual process. I think an incident decision tree is really quite helpful to begin with, but it should never be the end space, because as soon as you need rules and processes, the trust is gone, the autonomy is gone, the creativity is gone, the innovation's gone, all that space actually goes with it. The thing that we're just doing at the moment is this thing we're calling a check-in process. We've had a bit of a giggle about this because obviously from Liverpool, they keep on saying checking in. But it is a check-in process. And I think what we're trying to do is giving the individuals who are going through something now, you know, the ability to say, it just doesn't feel right. I don't feel right, or my colleague doesn't feel right, or the freedom to speak up. Guardian may say, I've heard this or I've heard that. So rather than wait until the outcome or the investigation is there, can we just check in and make sure it's going the way it needs to be going? Because although I'm speaking to you today, I'm certainly not saying that we still don't get things wrong in Mersey care, because we do. You know, I can say there and look at my stats and say, I know we harm far less people than what we did yesterday, but one person we harm is one too many. And I want to get that right for everybody within our workforce. We had another challenge this year with the outcome of our care cut review from the organisation we've just taken over, former Liverpool Community Health, in April. Quite a small community physical health organisation that had, on average, 111 investigations in a year. It was over 5% of the workforce were on an investigation at any one time. Over 15% of the workforce were on a sickness absence review at any one time. We had no incidents. No incidences were reported. There was fear at every level. You know, people didn't speak to you if you did report something. And basically just staff felt demoralised and worthless. And when we took over the management contract last year, sickness absence was around 12%. For a community service, that's pretty high. It should be around 4.5%, 5%. So what have we seen since we've taken it over? Well, disciplinary investigations have nosedived. We've seen the significance now increase in staff reporting incidences, and other levels of communication have opened. High visibility with executive colleagues, high visibility with senior managers, and staff feeling able to raise issues or concerns. Staff morale's increased, staff are feeling more valued, and actually our retention has also improved and our turnover has stopped, you know, as going in the right direction. And our sickness absence has actually halved in the 12-month period we've had the organisation. So now at 6%, it's still high. It was 9% in January, but it's going in the right direction. So we really feel that we're starting to support our staff. And you know more than most the impact of one of those reviews has on your workforce and on your colleagues. And it's tough, really, really tough to hear some of those high-level messages and the impact that we see when we've taken over an organisation that has really been, I suppose, a really bullying, high level of concern organisation for a period of time. What I just wanted to share with you is I think a lot of the time when we look at an incident in the workplace, we go into this thing of saying, Amanda caused that. So Amanda harmed patient X. Yeah. At worst case, it can be something minor harm, or it can be more significant harm. But what I did, the action that I took, harmed X. And when you speak to patients, their places sometimes when something's happened to their loved one, they want a name. Yeah, they want an individual. And some of the lessons that we've learned when these things have happened in our organisation more recently is actually when you get underneath that, what patients really want is they want an apology. They want to understand. They want to feel that humility, that you care for them and their family, and that ultimately you want to learn, and that nobody goes through what they have potentially been through. If you think about the Garber case, that's had a lot of press in terms of medical staff and their approach, and we reviewed that as an organisation to say, would we have taken that decision? And we've been quite open in saying, no, we wouldn't have taken that decision. Because if you looked at what was going on in that organisation about what else was responsible, you had a member of staff who just returned from maternity leave. There was gaps in staffing above and below, yeah? There was a lack of training. They'd just come back from maternity leave, you know, and they're thrown back into the deep end, 12 months out. There was technical issues, handover, so many system gaps, yet individuals were focused on. I'm not saying that sometimes individuals contribute to things, because they do. We're all human. We make mistakes. You know, we don't always do what we intended to do, or something in that context of the environment in which we're operating in. Things go away, and you know, what we plan for doesn't go like that. And we have to remember that sometimes we can contribute, but it doesn't mean we're the direct causation. And the other thing we talk about a lot is where we draw the line. So, you know, we talk about human error. So this is your human factor space, you know, so often when it's human error, that can be managed through support, counselling, and make minor amends things here and there. At-risk behaviour is where you might take a risk, but it's in line with your competencies and your profession, and you make a professional clinical judgment. And the question to ask here is, if I was a clinician, which I'm not, and I made an intervention and I believed it was a risky intervention, but I had to make a decision, I made that choice, I did that intervention. If somebody else in a similar context, similar environment would make a similar decision, then more likely it's around human error rather than at-risk behaviour. Reckless behaviour, well, that's, you know, pretty something that I don't think anyone would dispute. If you had a member of staff that assaulted a patient, dragged a patient by the hair, no one in this room is going to say, oh, well, you know, that's okay. Nobody would dispute that. Unfortunately, when you look at these things, they're never black or white. And the big question is, who draws the line? Who draws the line in these issues to say it's a human error, it's at risk, or it's a reckless behaviour? And that's a conversation that you have to explore. I don't believe it should be one person. I believe there should be a number of people that have that conversation. Benefits of just culture are so wide. You know, for me, it's just the realisation that not everybody comes to work every day is on their A game. You know, people, we say, don't we, don't bring your troubles to work, but we're only human. If things are going on at home, it will impact your working life. It will impact on what you contribute. But do you feel safe to raise what those issues are? And I think, you know, the big thing from a service user and patient experience perspective is that our staff start to protect our values because they live them, they enact them, they are them. And actually, what we've started to see now is our staff point things out to us when it's in that risky behaviour space, because they don't want to tolerate it either. They don't accept that either. And actually, it's a really powerful place to be when you start to learn in those multidisciplinary teams, because what it's helping us to do is reduce those risky behaviours and actually catch things before they become a problem. And this story, I think, is quite powerful. So Stuart is one of the ward managers that I spoke of before, who was suspended when we had those 3 inpatient deaths, and now he's one of our ambassadors. And for him to say that he wouldn't want to go through what happened again, but you know what? I'm starting to think it was a price worth paying to be part of the difference I've always wanted to see. Stuart's got one story, but we've got many of those stories within the organisation that are really powerful when people can start to hear from the people who's been at the sharp end of those experiences, the impact it's having on their working life. And James Titcombe, who I know you'll know in Morecambe Bay, has been very involved and interested in the piece of work that we've done, and also seeing as a carer, as a patient, where somebody was harmed, that actually, you know, in the worst possible way anybody can imagine, actually, that he still wants people to learn from that experience and how brave that is. And actually, Sydney was empowered by something very, very similar himself the worst possible experience anybody can go through, to actually want to encourage health practitioners to learn and remember that we have first victims. They are our patients, our service users and their families. But as a second victim, that's you, that's us. It doesn't mean we don't hurt and need support too. So before I open up to any questions, I just wanted to read out a paragraph of a poem that I wrote after, because I think it kind of sums up our journey. Our staff shared their stories of hurt, some recent and some of many years ago. To hear them was emotional, more than many of you would ever know. Yes, I am a leader, but I still feel your pain. I cried tears with you. I'm so sorry they may have been too late. Today is a new chapter. Help me take new strides. I can't promise it will be easy and we will get everything right. So I look forward with hope, optimism and pride. I genuinely feel together it's the only way we can learn and get things right. Thank you.